Hi, welcome back to In Search of a Way, where this week we're doing a crash course in Christian theology. I'm trying to tell you what you need to know about Christian theology to better contextualize the contemplative practices that we'll be discussing for most of the rest of the semester. Last time, I suggested to you that Jews, Christians, and Muslims have traditionally understood God as the creator. And by creator, what I mean is the unknown answer to the question, why anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever? Why anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever? Obviously, the answer to the question can't be one of the things, which is why I cannot emphasize enough. We do not know what God is. How can you know what God is if God isn't one of the things? You might say to yourself, well, I know what lots of things are that aren't one of the things. I know what unicorns are, and yet there are no unicorns. Well, let me deal with that question real quick here. One, when you say you know what a unicorn is, it's quite likely that what you mean is, I know what a unicorn is if there were one. In other words, what you mean is, if there were unicorns, I would know how to pick them out from non-unicorn things. If there were unicorns, I would be able to go into a field and say which things were or were not unicorns. That's what you mean when you say you know what a unicorn is. You don't know even that when it comes to God. You could not pick God out from other things because God cannot exist alongside other things. Second, you say you know what a unicorn is, even though unicorns aren't one of the things. What you mean by that is you can tell me what kind of thing a unicorn is. You say, at the very least, a unicorn is an animal, right? It's a kind of animal. Well, God isn't a member of a kind of thing the way unicorns are members of the kind animal. There is no kind, no genus, so to speak, or species, so to speak, which includes God. None whatsoever. Nor could there be, because God is the answer to the question, why anything? Why any species, for that matter? So, I mean, again, I could dwell on that point for quite a long time. And if you want to take next semester a class with me called Philosophical Inquiry, which I'm slated to teach in the spring, sign up. It'll be fun. We do quite a bit of thinking about Thomas Aquinas in that class. You'll learn quite a bit, I think. But today I want to move on in our exploration of Christian theology and talk a little bit about now how Christianity differs from Judaism and Islam. They all believe in the same God, okay? They all believe in the God that answers the question, why anything at all instead of nothing whatsoever. However, Christians believe that in the course of history, that God has sprung some surprises on us. And one of the biggest surprises that God has sprung on us is that that unknown God is what we call Trinity. A few years ago, a friend of mine took a trip to the Grand Canyon. Now, I've never been to the Grand Canyon. And my friend said, I went to the Grand Canyon and I stood there and I looked at it and I could only say one thing. What was that? I asked. And he said, holy shit! That's all he could possibly muster himself to say when confronted with the incredible, vast beauty of the Grand Canyon. Well, in one way, and I want to emphasize this is just one way, the Trinity, the Christian doctrine of the Trinity is a little bit like that. As the people of God that calls themselves the Christian Church has had a chance to reflect on God's self-revelation, as we've reflected on God's self-revelation, we have found ourselves, Christians have found themselves in awe, unable to really put together words to express what God has revealed. In some ways, the doctrine of the Trinity, a kind of first way of thinking about it, is it's the church's way of looking at God's self-revelation and saying, holy shit! Now, that's just really that's just a very kind of beginner's way of thinking about this, okay? The doctrine of the Trinity is this, that there's one God, one divine essence, indivisible, one being with no parts. God doesn't have parts. And yet that one God is three. Three what? Here the Christian church found itself really up against the wall. Three what? The story of divine revelation certainly says, thinks the church, that God has revealed God's self to be three. So the Christian church, a long time ago, invented a new word. What was that word? Person, or in Latin, persona. Etymologically related to the word for mask, like a mask worn in a drama, which is, by the way, also translatable in Latin as domino, related to the word dominus, dominion, Lord. Don't worry about these etymologies. I'm just trying to show you that the early church struggled to find a word to say three what. And they came up with person. Interestingly, have you heard that word before, person? Raise your hand if you've ever heard somebody say the word person. Oh, yeah. Yeah, how about that? Over time, the word person eventually came to be applied to you and me. How about that? How about that? Well, the doctrine of the Trinity is not saying this, that when you do the census report of everyone who's ever lived, make sure to add the following three names: Father, Son, Holy Spirit. That's not what the Trinity is about, right? That there's me and you and Bob Dylan and Taylor Swift and the Buddha, the Shakyamuni Buddha, and Thich Nhat Hanh and Pope Francis, and God the Father and God the Son and and God the Holy Spirit. Make sure those three are included in the census. No. That's not what the doctrine of the Trinity is at all. And yet Christians say, I believe in God the Father, who is not the same as God the Son, who is not the same as God the Holy Spirit. And yet Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are one God. Now, lots and lots of philosophical work has been done to show that this is not a logical contradiction. Lots and lots of work has been done to show that the doctrine of the Trinity is not tantamount to saying that, 1 equals 3 or 2 plus 2 equals 5 or something like that. And you can take classes here at Loyola Marymount University. I happen to teach some of them. I'm teaching right now a class called Faith and Reason. It's a class on the thought of Thomas Aquinas. I teach it for the philosophy department, and we look at arguments meant to show that this is not a logical absurdity. But we're not concerned with that in Search of a Way. In Search of a Way class, we're concerned with what does this mean for us? Well, here's what I think is important. The doctrine of the Trinity, the church's reflection upon revelation that leads it to say, holy shit, also means that God, the unknown God, has a way in. Let's put it that way. That there might be a way of coming to know the unknown God. How is that? Well, many Christian theologians say that it's possible to come to know the unknown God, not in this life. And the way we know, the way we'll come to know, is not through study or something like that. You see, these words Father and Son are very important here. What do those words mean to you? Father, Son? By the way, Father is not a great translation. Let me change it for you. Brief historical aside. Here's a brief historical aside. The reason the early church chose father and not parents, the reason they chose son is clear enough. It's because Jesus came and proclaimed himself the Son of God. So God, it seems, is parental. So why didn't the early church say parents? When Jesus says, I'm the Son of God, it seems like the church should have said, okay, so there's the parents, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, it's because for a long time people had a bad theory of biology. That bad theory went like this. The true parent is the father on this theory. The reason they thought this was because the only thing they ever really watched grow was plants. There were no x-rays or things like that. So, they were able to watch plants grow, but not people. Well, how does a plant grow? Well, you throw some seed into the ground, and that seed turns into a plant. And so people thought, well, it must be the same way in the case of animals. And they knew about semen. They knew about the sperm inside of semen. So they figured, oh, the man comes along, puts some seed into the womb, which is like a garden, they thought, and it just grows into another animal. In our case, a person. So they thought that the father was the one who really produces the child and that the woman was a kind of garden. This is bad biology. This has led to some really unfortunate things in history. It's a rather minor scandal in the grand scheme of things, a rather trivial issue that it led to our saying that God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But really, I think in the Christian tradition, we could quite accurately say that God is parents, Son, and Holy Spirit. The three persons, whatever that word means now, the three within the Trinity are the parents, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And you say, but parents is plural. Yeah, well, Father is gendered. We just have to choose which inaccuracy to go with. And the Holy Spirit is the kind of love between parents and son. Okay, well, the words father and son or parents and son, those are family words, aren't they? Family words. So the church, the Christian church, has come to believe that there's a chance, there's a way possibly of knowing God, not in this life, but again, it's not knowing through studying or looking at or observing. It's knowing by getting into, by being one of. In other words, you'll get to know what God is, thinks the church, if you become God. And you say, man, Kovac sure is talking nonsense. No, I'm not. A quote that goes all the way back to the 4th century with St. Athanasius, and it's repeated by many, many doctors of the Christian church, including St. Thomas Aquinas, is as follows. God became human so that humans can become God. You'll find that in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. This is official teaching of the Catholic Church. God becomes human so that humans can become God. How do humans become God? Well, by becoming part of the family, that is the Trinity. Does this mean that now God has extra children? There will be parents, Son, Holy Spirit, Jack, Jill, Kovac, etc. No, not quite. But still, and I'm working with a level of metaphor here, but it's the best available to us. It's going to go something like this. You might tell me about your family. You might tell me some interesting things about your family. Cool. Now I guess I know something about your family. You might say, look, my family has a tradition that we get together every year on Christmas Eve, December 24th. We eat Arby's roast beef sandwiches, and we each open up one present on Christmas Eve. Cool. Now I know something about your family, I guess. Before I knew that you had a family. Now I know something about your family. But suppose you said to me, why don't you come over this year on Christmas Eve? Well, now I could come over and I'll watch you all eat roast beef sandwiches. I might even have a roast beef sandwich myself. And we'll each open a Christmas present. Now I've got some experience of your family. But suppose your family said, hey, let's adopt Dr. Kovac. He is now a, whatever your last name is, a Smith. That's right, I'm looking at you, Smith. Right? By the way, Kovac is Hungarian for Smith. Well, you adopt me, and now I go to Christmas Eve. I wake up with you all on Christmas Day. I know that Uncle George and Uncle Bobby haven't gotten along in a long time. Not since Uncle Bobby married Aunt Susie, because Uncle George wanted to marry Aunt Susie. Now I know something about your family. I go to all the holidays. I know your traditions. People send me cards. They call me on my birthday. I call them. I have a good time with you all. I'm in the family. I'm in the family, right? Your family becomes as much a part of my life as anything because you've adopted me into your family. Now I know your family, don't I? Having been adopted into it, now I know your family. The doctrine of the Trinity is a message of hope for Christians. It says that the unknowable God, the unknown God, can be known, but not by study, but by adoption into a family. The doctrine of the Trinity tells us, as Christians, losing my voice here. The doctrine of the Trinity is that there is this possibility. It's not coronavirus, I'm sure. I just have this little tickle in my throat. Okay, so that's what you need to know about the Trinity for now. Again, I mean, a lot can be said about the Trinity, but I'm trying to give you an overview of it that's conducive to us studying the Christian contemplative traditions. The Trinity is not supposed to help us understand what God is, by the way. Not at all. We still don't know what God is. What we now have in the Trinity is a promise that we can know what God is by being adopted into God's life, by becoming God ourselves, by sharing the divine life, the life of a family. That family is called the Trinity. Well, there's one more surprise left to come. And that's the surprise where we get to kind of see what the life of God is kind of like. That has to do with the second person of the Trinity, the Son. We're going to talk about that in our next lecture. What is this Jesus stuff? Jesus the Christ, after whom Christianity gets its name. What's that all about? Stay tuned. We'll find out. For now, all I want you to understand is that the Trinity, the doctrine of the Trinity, is that the unknowable God is knowable through adoption. The mystery will be available, think Christians. And the contemplative tradition in Christianity will ultimately be an effort to stand in awe, to stand in our own kind of holy shit awe of the unknown God. Okay, see you next time.